Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In this our talk of the Geological Society of Oman. My name is Elias Farousi. I'm the president of the Geological Society of Oman. I am now hosting a talk with our guest for the afternoon. His name is Andrew Lawrence, and he's actually from the Ministry of Tourism in Oman. The talk is about developing geotourism and geoparks in Oman. And what is it all about is basically a geopark in Oman. We know that it's actually a unified and magnificent place which has different aspects of geological heritage and places that are actually of our interest and interest of internationally present as well. This, however, might be actually kind of as well protected and sustained for generations to come, and it has to be open for the global geoparks as well to be a distance or a visit for others from outside Oman. We know actually more about the talk, so I'm just giving you a hint on the abstract of the talk. So developing, our talk will be developing geotourism and geoparks in Oman. Oman has an outstanding array of geological phenomena, many of which are international significance. These underpin Oman's rich blend of nature based of cultural attractions. In combination, this is Oman's key competitive advantage that sets it apart from its neighbors. This presentation aims to provide an insight into geotourism and geopark in Oman. Aspiration to develop Oman's first geopark as a member of the UNESCO World Global Geoparks Network. And I will leave actually this talk will be led by our speaker guest, Andrew Lawrence. Andrew is a sustainable tourism professional with more than 30 years experience in developing and managing tourism projects worldwide in environmentally sensitive areas, karst-related conservation, tourism management, and product development. Following an extensive career with government agencies in New South Wales, Australia, Andrew is currently an advisor for the Ministry of Tourism in the Sultanate of Oman. And he's basically facilitating nature-based tourism product development, and he's currently the leader of the Tanfeedh Tourism Initiative to develop geoheritage tourism in Oman. So, Andrew, welcome to this talk, and the floor is yours straight away, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Elias, for that introduction, and also thank you to the GSO for inviting me to present today's talk on developing geotourism and geoparks in Oman. For today's presentation, I'll first of all talk about why geotourism in Oman is special. We'll look at a vision for geotourism in Oman, and also then talk a little bit about geotourism development, and also, as Elias mentioned in the preamble, talk about the development of the potential to develop geoparks in Oman as well. First of all, what about a definition for geotourism? Geotourism is considered to be a niche of or a sector of ecotourism. Ecotourism is defined as a responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of local people, and involves interpretation and education. There are there is no real definition of a worldwide definition of either ecotourism or even geotourism in the world. In fact, the first definition of geotourism came about or published was in 1995, and it simply defines it as providing interpretation of the geology and geomorphology of a site. Since then, there have been some further definitions of that. One of the, or I should say that definition was very much a geological definition. And since that time, there have been other definitions which have been more of a geographical definition in nature. And for example, the National Geographic defines geotourism as a tourism that sustains or enhances the distinctive geographical character of a place, its environment, its heritage, its aesthetics, culture, and the well-being of its residents. So it expands on just looking at geology on its own. And geotourism begins with an understanding of the abiotic environment to build a greater awareness of the biotic environment of plants and animals, as well as the cultural environment of people present and past. And this is more of the definition that we'll use today, as it also fits with the definition of geoparks for UNESCO. And it's also a more holistic definition which embraces other aspects as opposed to just geology alone, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail later on. What is the demand for this? Well, around 25% of the global travel is environment-based. So Oman, for our viewers would know, is well placed to capitalize on this through geotourism. And it includes, it's included in the Ministry of Tourism strategy to 2040, which identifies developing sustainable nature-based tourism and working with local communities. So we'll be looking at hopefully developing some SMEs as well. Why is geotourism in Oman so special? Well, in a holistic sense, I'm preaching to the converted here, I'm sure today, but it's a safe and peaceful place. The friendliness of the Omani people is without parallel, and there's a great traditional values in the country. We have a great variety of cultural attractions with ancient civilizations, villages in the mountains, forts and castles, and traditional souks as well. It's all underpinned by fascinating stories of the outstanding array of geological features. Again, I won't dwell too much on the resources that we have in Oman at the moment, just to identify that we have some great stories of regional geological diversity, from the mountains of Musandam with the drowned valleys up in the north, to the more younger sedimentary coastline along the coast. Jebel Shams, of course, the highest mountain in Oman at 3,000 meters. And as part of the Western Hejaz mountain chain, we have some great desert areas, of course, with the Rub al Khali and also the Eshakir sands. And also in the central area, we have the Hukuf region, which is just a fascinating place for geology. And of course, down south, everything changes as well. We've got some great geology in the south, as well as some very different climate and scenery at times of the year through the Harif. We've also got some great specific geosite stories of diversity as well. We can look at the ophiolite pillow lavas of Wadi Jizi. We have the Ghossan Arch in Al Batna relating to the ophiolite story as well. In the central areas, we have Dukum. The photo in the middle is from Dukum Rock Garden, and also in the Al Hukuf region, some great fossil deposits as well, and significant to the story of the oil industry in Oman too. And of course, we've got even some fantastic subterranean features as well, such as Majlis Al Jinn that you can see on the screen now. The stories of the culture and lifestyle in Oman has been influenced by the geology and climate as well. The land has been adapted to provide habitation for people, and the culture and the geology and the people, they create a very rich blend and a unique destination. So we have some fantastic resources. The role of geology in tourism, as I mentioned before, by the definition that we're using, we have to be aware that geology, interest in geology alone is very much a specialist market. Visitors to geoparks range from those with a huge interest and a very specific scientific interest in geotourism, through to those who are almost accidental visitors. They don't know what a geopark is, they just stumble upon the geopark. And there's some that have a curious role in the actual site itself. They just may be simply curious about the site. So when we look at marketing and promoting geotourism, we look at making sure that interpretation of the natural and the cultural sites, the geology plays an important role, and it can enhance the visitor experience through appreciation and understanding, looking at the landscape, why the landscape is formed in this beautiful way, the plants and animals, how they adapted or to the life through the geology itself, and also we mentioned before the culture of the people too. It's also got the opportunity to add value to existing nature and culture-based experiences, such as, for example, here we're looking at adventure activities. If you undertake a trekking tour, it's always great to get the background of the geology as to what's going on in the surrounding scenery. Apart from just being a beautiful scenery, there's some fascinating stories about how these geological features have developed as to what you're looking at. In the top right-hand side picture, again, there's stories of things like climbing activities. Many of you may well know the famous least chains in Wadi Hawasana. So that has almost a cultural story as well as the geological story of one of the first geologists to write about Oman and document it. Adventure caving, even with adventure caving, quite often you can see some beautiful fossils in the caves, and you can understand the age of the rock. You can see the speleothems. You can get an idea of the age of the cave through, at least, or minimum ages of the cave through the speleothem development, because you can measure these things. You can understand some of the amazing hydrological processes that take place to the formation of the rock as well. The boy there is climbing in Kaftari, and in that area, which is up on the Selma Plateau near Fins, if you get significant rain on the top of the plateau, that whole area becomes a massive flooded area. Four-wheel driving, even there you can look at and understand these beautiful rock formations as you drive around, and we can see some of those features on some of the heritage apps that we've developed, which again I'll talk about shortly. Vision for geotourism in Oman, well, it's a very strong element of Oman's brand values. The picture there is taken looking out over towards Snake Gorge in the Al Hajar Mountains, and it's these sort of images of getting away, being in remote areas that is a great call to action, used in the Ministry of Tourism marketing campaigns, frequently that particular image. It's got an increasing role in Oman's product offer. It's Oman should be an active stakeholder in developing and increasing geotourism. Another vision is that through Oman's geodiversity, geotourism will play a key part in developing regional tourism. And also, as Elias mentioned at the start, to continue to strengthen the international ties that we have. And all these elements fit very well with Oman's tourism strategy, as well as aspirations for us to become a geopark as well. Some examples of geotourism product in Oman. Al Huda Cave, probably, well, it was certainly the first, one of the first geotourism products to be developed, one of the first commercial products of nature-based tourism to be developed as well. Started back in 1995, even before the Ministry of Tourism was developed through. It came about through the idea of the Oman government to exploit some of the cave heritage that we have in Oman. As many of you know, we have some huge and fantastic caves. Al Huta was one of the favourites to be developed in the first instance, partly for its accessibility for tourism, its features inside the cave, and also, of course, its proximity to Muscat, being within a one-day drive back to Muscat as well. So ideal to be developed tourism. The government at that time in Oman, they worked with the Vienna Museum of Natural History to develop a sustainable design for the cave itself. So they did a lot of initial baseline studies to start off with, and then they developed the design based on best practice principles for cave management. You can see, for example, the lighting system itself is toned down so as not to put too much light on the cave features too much. The walkways have been raised above the ground in most places as well. So around about 800 meters of tunnel, of pathways and electrical lighting and stairs were put into Al Huda Cave originally. As you can see on the screen, the cave was opened in 2006. It has a visitor center. It has a small train which takes people to the cave and back again. Again, that's part of the sustainability of the cave itself. The visitor center was deliberately placed around half a kilometer away from the cave entrance to provide a buffer zone for the cave itself. Nowadays, around about 70,000 people visit Al Huta caves a year, and employs a team of more than 20, and most of these are from the local community. Oman also managed to win the bid to promote the third Global Geotourism Conference, which was held in Muscat in 2011. We had around about 330 delegates from 30 countries. And the scope of the conference was looking at widening the scope of geotourism, education, interpretation, sustainable development, protected areas, including geoparks, and promoting and managing tourism destination. In 2012, we developed, or the Ministry of Tourism developed a pilot project for a geoheritage app and guide. Initially, we developed 30 geosites around Muscat, and you can navigate to those sites on a map. And when you get to the site itself, you can see some information on the site. The original app was translated into 4 different languages. Since that time, in 2019, we've expanded that to now cover more than 100 geosites around Oman. And that's you can download that app just by looking at Oman Geoheritage Guide in your apps that you have. So all these geosites have now got some interpretation to them as well. Again, to raise awareness of geoheritage, and also it's got some information about safely moving around these sites and conservation messages as well. In more recent times, the Tanfeedh initiative has been developed, which is an Omani government initiative to diversify the national revenue streams and stimulate economic growth in Oman. The sectors covered many different types of sectors, including agriculture, mining industries, the oil industry, of course, and many other industries as well. Tourism was one of the initiatives, and initially there were 10 specific tourism initiatives to facilitate interagency cooperation and to develop ecotourism and geotourism in Oman. Some of the work that has been achieved to date is there is available a geotourism map of the Worcester area. There are guidelines and awareness information for Dukum Rock Garden and our Worcester Wildlife Reserve, and these are also accompanied by the first online permit systems that are available for these. Again, these provide information, awareness and conservation messages for visitors on arrival. We've been concentrating initially on the Al Hukaf area, but you'll see in a moment that we've also now expanding to a secondary region as well. At the moment, we're currently developing some geoheritage training for tour guides. This will be developing some content, and the concept for that is working with our partners, the PDO in this particular case. They are assisting in developing some geoheritage and geological knowledge and content that will be used for training guides in Oman, so that the guides can become aware of not just the history of Oman and the culture of Oman, but to add that additional layer of the geology as well to underpin and enhance the experience. One of the part of the Tanfeedh initiative that I've just mentioned as well, one of the key things that has been done for this initiative is to commission the Geological Society of Oman, was commissioned in 2019 to undertake a feasibility study for the sustainable developments of geoparks in Oman. And the idea being to identify the best location or geopark that we could develop in the first instance, and potentially to become a member of the UNESCO Global Geoparks Network. So the study itself assessed some predefined locations, which were predefined through the SQU, the Geological Society of Oman, and the Ministry of Tourism. So the sites with themselves, of course, were the Samail Ophiolite as a very prime contender. It's of international significance. Jebel Samhan in the south, Al Hukaf, of course, that we've mentioned before, Jebel Afda, the Selma Plateau with its huge cave systems. Majlis Al Jinn cave is in the Selma Plateau, the Kaftari cave that I showed before as well. That's there, and that's part of an 11.5 kilometer long cave system. Musandam, with its amazing drowned valleys that we mentioned before. Al Khairan area, close to Muscat. So the sites themselves were all assessed against the UNESCO criteria for geopark application to be a geopark member. The one that was proposed in the end was a combination of the Samail Ophiolite sequence and Jebel Akhdar as well. To try to develop a geopark of the Samail Ophiolite would be a very difficult thing for us to do as the very first geopark in Oman. because of its huge area. And even if we had many geoparks, it's unlikely that it will be feasible to develop a geopark in that huge area because of the administration and the cost of maintaining that particular site. So the study came up with an eighth recommendation. As I said, it's a combination of the Samail Ophiolite and also Jebel Al Akhdar, and it covers the area from the north in Al Batna, just a small part of Al Batna, mainly the Al Dakhliya region, down to Nizwa in the south, and covering Jebel Shams across to the west as well. So what is a geopark itself? What's a UNESCO World Global Geopark? It is, as I mentioned, developed by the United Nations, UNESCO itself, and so far, after I think around about 20 years of being developed, there are over 140 geoparks, and they're in 41 countries. Many of them are in Europe, and many of them are in China as well. China has some amazing geology if you ever get a chance to go there. What is a global geopark? What's the definition of that? To be a UNESCO listed geopark, you have to cover conservation, education, and geotourism. It has to be a defined geographical area. It has to be an area where sites and landscapes of international significance are managed in a holistic concept of conservation, education, and sustainable development. And of course, it must include local communities. It takes into account the geographical setting of the region. As we discussed before, that's the abiotic, the biotic, and also the cultural aspects of the region. This is the village of Sokra in Jebel Akhdar, and it's part of the Mecca, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Affairs nature reserve in Jebel Akhdar. Now the villagers, I believe, have developed a cave close by where you can do some adventure caving. So it recognises the natural, cultural, and social history are inextricably linked, and they can't be separated. So a geopark will include sites of all these areas that I mentioned before: the ecological, the archaeological, historical, and cultural value. We should note that the branding of an area as a geopark doesn't necessarily affect the legal status of the land. For example, if we had a geopark that surrounds any of the nature reserves by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Affairs, the legal status of that nature reserve doesn't change at all. So geoparks are more about branding. They're about getting local communities to work together to conserve and promote geology and other heritage in a sustainable way. Some examples, I mentioned China has some amazing features. This one is the Dang Jiashang. I will probably pronounce that terribly. It covers an area of 290 square kilometers, mainly landforms of sandstone and conglomerate, but has some amazing rock peaks and towers in it. You can see the main peak is nearly 620 meters above sea level. It's also called the Redstone Park. And I think probably one of the reasons why it's very popular is that in the rocks, they resemble sculptures of man or animals. And that's quite a common theme in many geoparks and geological areas where people like to imagine those sceneries in that. And there are examples of that all around Muscat, for example, and the rocks from there, and also particularly, for example, with the Dookham Rock Garden that I showed a slide of earlier. There's also some very old ancient anthropological artifacts as well, dating back from 6,000 years ago. And to show the significance of this to the value of the economy, the local communities can benefit through over 3 million visitors annually. And the locals run restaurants, motels and shops, and that has significantly improved their livelihood and income. A last example, of which there are many, but this one is of the Burren and Cliffs of Moher in Ireland. And that's an area of around about 530 square kilometres. So it's a glacial landscape. It has fossil-rich limestone. It's got some coastal scenery, as you can see. It's got a lot of rare natural habitats, some endemic flora, and again, legacies of human culture from over 6,000 years ago. The Geopark itself has worked very well, and they have been internationally recognised by the work that they've done in developing, for example, a collaborative network of over 60 tourism businesses that work together to promote the area and all gain benefit from it. They have community-based environmental learning centres. They have accredited tourism businesses, so there's an area of quality assurance for the businesses that they operate. They've got conservation groups working, they've got visitor centres, farm tour cooperatives, some great potential for Oman to do that, of course, and managed outdoor recreation routes and hubs as well. So getting together, they have really done a huge amount of work in developing the economy in a sustainable way for the future for them too. So some good examples of how we can do similar things in Oman. So the next steps that we're looking at towards developing geotourism at this stage, we will continue to work with all the stakeholder agencies, of which there are many. For example, the Ministry of Heritage and Culture has recently, by edict, now been made responsible for geoheritage in Oman. So they would be one of the key leaders in this particular thing. We've got the Ministry of Environment and Climate Affairs also, of course. We have the Ministry of Tourism has an interest in developing the tourism potential of these sites. The Public Authority of Mines, they have been, they're also important for helping to identify areas for protection of sites as well, and they have in the past at least as well. The Geological Society of Oman, a great non-government agency to assist in that, and as you can see, they've already been assisting. The Petroleum Development Company of Oman as well, they've been assisting with through their in-country value projects, and their team have been a great assistance so far in working towards this goal and vision of developing a UNESCO listed geopark. Also, of course, another stakeholder is the municipalities. The Ministry of Municipalities is important. Ministry of Agriculture as well, and even the SME organisation too, because we need to develop this in a way that can sustain some of the local population, and even it can help prevent that urban drift that has been happening in Oman, as it has been happening in many other countries in the world as well. So to do that, we need to look at implementing the Geopark development program, which is proposed in the feasibility study completed by the Geological Society of Oman. The key part of that is to develop a management plans for We're looking at developing the management plans for Al Hajjah, but also we want to look at developing the Al Hukaf area also as a geopark in the future. Al Hajjah has got the potential and probably a greater capacity than the Al Hukaf region, which is a little bit more remote. So Al Hukaf would be a slow burner in that sense. But certainly we can still work towards both of these. We need to establish an agency responsible for geopark development in Oman, and along with it, as recommended by the GSO, a steering committee, which would be comprised of the stakeholders I mentioned before, amongst others as well. And what we can do in the meantime for that is to continue to raise awareness and the capacity at community and government levels to have workshops, for example, with government agencies to raise awareness of what geoparks are, what they can do, how they can help communities and the economy and conservation. And this will be both for Al Hajjah and Al Hukaf. And also the training programs that I mentioned before that we're working with the PDO, and in the future we hope they can assist us with developing further capacity building as well. We can also, in the meantime, look at increasing the awareness to the general public, and also looking at the footfall for tourism at these regions as well, to start encouraging the footfall. Once we get an idea of the number of people that can actually visit these geoparks, it can help investors to work out to enhance their interest in investing in these sites as well. And we can do that by implementing some of the marketing plans that we've started to develop. So that's about it for me for today. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and I'm sure Elias will come back to me with any comments or questions. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. It's really a very interesting actually subject. Plenty of actually kind of vocabulary that maybe it's somehow new to the society, to the community here in Oman. The geoparks, the geotourism itself. I think this is something that we really kind of need to be actually really pushing and progressing forward. And we are very glad that this actually went under the initiative of the Tanfeedh. And maybe you are actually really the Tanfeedh, the leading Tanfeedh initiative in the tourism part. Can you? I have actually a few questions that we have gathered, and we have few other questions from members that they have followed our broadcast. I just actually maybe mention my observations. I mean, I like actually one of the words described actually at the very beginning of the presentation, that you said the right blend. So the right blend, that actually really that phrase, it meant maybe kind of, you know, some sort of combination of things that we have. It's like an ingredient in Oman that maybe it makes it a little bit special if you compare it to the outside or in the nearby regime. So can you elaborate a little bit actually what is that the right blend that makes it a little bit kind of special and going through this geopark development and sustainability?
Yeah, the blend that we have, as you mentioned in the preamble itself, is we have some of the best diversity in the Gulf country for our blend of amazing geological sites, the diversity of the geological sites as well, the cultural heritage as well, and how that relates to the geology and has been defined by geology. There are some synergies there. There's synergies with the biotic features as well.
Yeah.
For example, you saw an image of the Arabian oryx during the presentation, and how they live in the desert climates and the environment, and how they've adapted to those particular lives as well. And of course, the flora and fauna has developed, and that's even combines with the culture as well, because I know that Oman has some many different plants and species that have been used for medicinal purposes for years and years. And these stories themselves, they enhance the experience to a visitor for Oman. For example, if you stand on the Corniche in Matra with a tour group, and the tour guide starts to tell you about, if you can imagine yourselves between 70 and 90 million years ago, when you can see the sea, the land from the sea starting to encroach upon the land over the top, and push the volcanic sequence up over on top of Oman, sitting there, becoming eroded. It makes the whole experience just that little bit more interesting when you include the geology of the site.
Yes. So thank you, Andrew, for that. Just maybe one question from me, and then I will move to the others. I always actually, because I come from a background of petroleum aspects, and sort of looking at maybe higher picture of the country's economic resources, and we are always talking about the current situations, and maybe before going further actually to maximize the resources in the country, maybe looking at diversification in terms of the economic resources. I know that you have mentioned that you have mutual interest as well with other ministries, ministries of actually maybe heritage and environmental as well. Have you actually really determined some sort of a scale of a GDP, maybe not a figure, just maybe to have maybe kind of a possible plan or potential that this geopark or geotourism that can add a value and can come up as a scale in our GDP in the country, maybe not in a short term, might be in a long term plan.
Some of the original workshops for the Tanfeedh program, they looked at some of the economic benefits, and they actually did some economic projections. I don't have those figures with me right now, but the reason why it was a popular thing in the original development of the Tanfeedh initiatives was that it had potential to attract or to develop many millions of reals for the economy, and also huge numbers of employment as well. If you look at the Geopark in China, for example, the level of 3 million tourists to that one destination, that's approximately the visitation that we have in international visitors to Oman at the moment. So if you can start to think about those kind of figures in the long term, then there's a huge amount of economic benefit. Even in longer terms as well, one of the sites that was looked at in the Tanfeedh program as a case study was the Riviera Geopark in the south coast of England. And of course, the south coast of England has had already huge amounts of established facilities going back hundreds of years for accommodation and as a tourist attraction as well. The Geopark there has now substantially increased that visitation.
Sure, thank you. I will actually read some of the questions that we have received live through our broadcast on YouTube and Twitter. So this is Muhammad Al-Amri. He's actually asking about on what basis the boundary of a certain geopark is established.
It's an excellent question. And for example, the Al-Hajar Geopark, the boundary has been initially proposed as not a fait accompli or as a definitive boundary, but it covers the some of the key geological areas and catchments of Jebel Akhdar, and across to the other side of the Samail Gap as well. So it includes the ophiolites in that area, and also the ones that on the northern side of the mountains of the Western Hejaz into Al-Batna. So it covers those areas of the ophiolite sequence and also the sedimentary sequences of Jebel Akhdar as well. Now, that area that has been initially proposed, again, it's quite a large area. It's actually several thousand square kilometers. And if you looked at the two examples that I gave you before, one was for around about 500 square kilometers in Ireland, and the other one was, I think, 300 to 400 square kilometers in Northern Ireland. So I think, and also another part of the working out of the boundary needs to look at some of the tourism aspects as well. And I know that the Supreme Council for Planning in their spatial strategy analysis is looking at regions and zones, which also comply with the Ministry of Tourism's own boundaries for developing certain sectors as well. So when we develop our Hadji Geopark, it hasn't been done yet. There's a discussion that needs to take place. It will take into account all of those factors. And one of the key factors that we need to maintain, I feel, is, well, to enable us to become a UNESCO Geopark, is that we need to have the geology of international significance. That's one of the key features in a UNESCO Geopark.
Thank you, Andrew. We have actually plenty of questions. I would rather maybe advise to have really a short, clear answers, so we can give some kind of time for other people to ask their questions. We have Samir Al-Mandari asking about, maybe I could rephrase his question. It's just an impact of the geopark in the community, whether it's negative or positive. Does it have any sort of an impact in any way or so?
Yeah, there are in any tourism development, whether it's a geopark development or any other tourism development, there is always the potential for both positive and negative impact. And it's something that we need to look at in terms of developing a sustainable tourism product. And the sustainability has to be both financial and environmental, as well as cultural as well. So those impacts, for example, one thing that I saw the other day is adventure tourism has a huge potential for Oman. Adventure tourism is growing at a rate of around about 1 in 4 out of 10 people, I think, actually undertake some sort of adventure tourism activity. Now, if that's not done correctly, then that can actually have some impact on the environment, and it needs to be balanced. What quite often will happen in these kind of areas is that you would develop a zoning system. So some of the very sensitive geological sites, for example, that are very difficult to protect, maybe those won't even be shown. In fact, so we would not publicize or promote those unless we had some proper form of protection, either by casing, fencing, or even a visitor center and guiding. Tourism can actually have a very beneficial effect on these things as well, in that if you actually develop a tourism project around the site and you manage it in the right way that will not impact the environment in the long term, then that provides a protection for the geosites, because you've got security guards there. So you can have a win-win situation there where you can protect the site as well as conserve it. So yeah, there are some good and bad. And again, it's the reason why, for example, UNESCO require you to have a management plan. That's a key part of it, and the zoning will come as part of the management plan.
I have another question by Khalid Al-Husni. I would actually as well rephrase it if I understood it actually rightly. I think he's asking about, do we have at the current time any registered sites, geological or heritage site that is registered under the UNESCO at the moment?
At the moment, we don't have any sites or geoparks registered with UNESCO. We are at the moment we have had some comment and communication with UNESCO with regards to geoparks. For example, the study that was undertaken, they brought in a UNESCO assessor to
Yeah,
assist in the recommendations for the park. So we've had some initial correspondence with them,
yeah,
and there. So yes, we have had some correspondence, but we're looking at this moment in time, we would identify ourselves as aspiring to to have a membership of the UNESCO Global Geoparks Network. And before we can become that, UNESCO has quite a lengthy process for applications. It takes 2 to 3 years after you've actually established an initial geopark in itself. So we need to establish the steering committee, who's going to be responsible, and the management plans for that as well. So there's lots of work to be done, and many of your members may wish to be part of that. And if you are, then that would be great, because you guys are the future of geoparks in Oman, I believe.
yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I have a question. It's well, it's strange. Ibrahim and Mamadi is asking about the geopark and eco park.
Yes, well, UNESCO doesn't actually have an eco park as such. It does have a man and biosphere park, which is close to that. They also, of course, have World Heritage listed areas as well. So those are the sites that they have for that. A geopark would feature, of course, the geoheritage of the area, which is why they started to develop that. They found that they had World Heritage listed areas. They started the Man and Biosphere program as well. And they realized there was a gap for conservation of geology, which is why they started the process of developing geoparks. So they are, in many ways, a similar thing, but a geopark is more of a focusing or making sure, not so much focusing, but making sure that the geology is conserved in a particular site.
Good, thank you. I have two more questions. One from Saud. I think in general, Saud is actually talking about the installation panels, or basically the descriptive panels that you put at each geological or heritage site. I think maybe this is maybe not under particularly the Ministry of Tourism, it's maybe related as well to the Ministry of Heritage at all these heritage sites, and maybe some of them under the tourism jurisdiction as well. Are these sites more or less actually fully covered at the moment with these descriptive signs and historical, background on the area or the place itself?
Yeah, the background is, I think where he's going to is the background is the original pilot program where we developed 30 geosites in the Muscat area. That had not only the digital information that you could get on the app, but the ministry also installed at that time a number of signboards which basically reflected what you can see on the app, and they were erected around the Muscat area. Now, there's a couple of things have happened since then. The signs have deteriorated. They take a lot of upkeep to maintain. Unfortunately, they are in many cases in remote areas and have been subject to vandalism, which happens in every country, unfortunately. And these days, there has been, of course, a huge increase in the technology capability to deliver interpretation. So the 100 sites that we've now developed around Oman are only available on the digital app itself. We haven't put the signboards up. because the penetration of smartphones and apps is much more prevalent than even 8 years ago when we put in these signboards. So the proposal is that we will be keeping the information in a digital format. It'll be available on websites and also the app itself as well.
Sure. I think the last question for this evening from Khalid. I think the mining law at the moment is actually shaping up in Oman by the regulation of the mining regulatory by the government. Do they have any sort of standards or kind of conditions in the preservation of our geological heritage? Is there any collaboration or mutual interest between you and Ministry of Tourism and the Mining Authority?
Yes, there is some collaboration in that the Public Authority of Mines, which was previously responsible for the geology of Oman, basically, and the mineral assets of Oman, they recognised that there were some sites that are very sensitive sites, and that they are representative of international value and national value in Oman as well. So they actually have put forward a number of sites that will be legally protected. And I understand that the GSO has done some very good work in collaborating and talking with them on the conservation of those sites. In addition, I think possibly the PDO have been involved in that too. So there has been some collaboration, and what the advantage of developing, for example, a steering committee for Geopark development will be that that collaboration is enhanced greatly.
Good. That concludes our questions for the evening. Andrew, I would like really to thank you on behalf of the Geological Society of Oman of actually giving us your time and the initiative to allow us and allow the audience to know about our geopark and geotourism in Oman. And people in the audience are really interested in such a subject because we are all either living within these sites or actually we have some sort of a historical, visits within these places. And I would like to thank the Ministry of Tourism for allowing us actually to host you and to present this material to the audience and to the followers, members of the Geological Society of Oman and the public as well. Andrew Lawrence, an advisor to the Ministry of Tourism, thank you very much for your time. And I wish you luck in your the project, and be looking forward for progressing further with the geopark and geotourism development in Oman.
Thank you very much, Elias. I appreciate those sentiments, and I'm sure we can work together for it. And thanks to everybody for listening, and thanks to the GSO for inviting me to raise awareness of this.
Thank you, and good evening. Thank you.